Welcome to the first episode of Network Africa for August 2016. We're glad you could join us. Coming up on the program, Amnesty International criticizes Indonesia for executing 4 people for drug-related offenses, including 2 Nigerians. Then South Africans prepare to head to the polls on August the 3rd for the local government elections. We find out how preparations are going from Johannesburg. And later, just how ready is Rio for the 2016 Olympics, which begin on Friday, August the 5th? Thanks for staying tuned to Network Africa on Channels Television with me, Cynthia Are. Happy New Month to all our viewers. Now, just before we fill you in on what Amnesty International has to say about Indonesia's actions last Thursday, here's a quick look at the top 3 stories which made headlines on the African continent this past weekend.
On Friday evening, the United Nations Security Council have voted in favor of authorizing the deployment of up to 228 United Nations police to Burundi to monitor the security and human rights situation in the East African country, though 4 of the 15 members abstained from the vote.
The authorization of a UN police component will put additional eyes and ears on the ground who will be able to report directly to the Security Council. That is valuable. But we should not harbor any illusions that this will fix Burundi's problems. It will only, at best, observe those problems. Police are not being deployed to protect civilians, even though civilians are in dire need of protection. That should embarrass us. Instead, police are effectively being asked to be human rights monitors. That is the most that we as a council were able to agree upon, and we couldn't even secure consensus on this. This really raises questions about this council's will when it comes to preventing atrocities, especially when a government is implicated in atrocities.
Libyan forces made a fresh push to capture ground from Islamic State militants besieged in the center of their former stronghold of Sirte. Nearly 3 months into a campaign to recapture the city, brigades mainly composed of fighters from nearby Misrata are waging sporadic street battles in residential areas where militants use snipers, mines and concealed explosives to defend their position. Finally, at least 7 people, including 2 attackers, were killed in a suicide attack on Somali's Criminal Investigation Department's headquarters on Sunday. Police say they killed 2 gunmen who stormed into the building after 3 car bombs exploded outside. The militant Islamic group Al-Shabaab claimed responsibility for the attack.
And just in case you missed out on one of the biggest issues which made headlines last Thursday, allow me to refresh your memory. Despite pleas and calls from the United Nations, the European Union and Amnesty International, to mention a few, Indonesia went ahead to carry out 4 executions of 4 people who were accused of drug trafficking. 3 of those who were executed were Nigerians, while 1 was a local. Initially, Indonesia planned to carry out 14 executions that day, but went ahead to state 10 executions. The authorities claim they made the move so as to carry out further investigations, while other sources say they plan to carry out the executions in days to come. For today, we are going to be turning our attention to what groups like Amnesty International have to say about it, and they've condemned that act. I should mention that. Joining us from London is Amnesty International's Deputy Director for Southeast Asia and the Pacific, Joseph Benedict. Joseph, thank you very much for joining us on Network Africa.
Thank you.
Now, Amnesty International has always taken a stand against capital punishment. Why is that the case?
Well, Amnesty has taken this position on the death penalty for all cases under all circumstances because it is rooted in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which all countries have signed up to. We believe the death penalty is a violation of the right to life and the ultimate cruel, inhuman and degrading punishment. Over time, the last few decades, we have seen more and more countries realize the death penalty is not a solution to crime and must be consigned to history. When we started campaigning on the death penalty in 1977, only 16 countries had abolished the death penalty. But today, more than 100 countries have repealed laws that allow for the death penalty, and more than 2/3 of the world have abolished the death penalty in law and practice.
Well, Joseph, 4 people, as you know already, were executed last Thursday, while 10 received a stay of execution in Indonesia. Do you think the Indonesian authorities stayed those executions due to pressure from organizations like yours, or to actually carry out more investigations like they claim?
But it's still unclear the reasons the executions were halted for the 10 people, and this lack of transparency is appalling, and also the total disregard of due process. There was clearly a lack of adequate notification to many of the families. Some only knew about the executions 24 hours before their families were executed, and some were also traveling to the location when this occurred. We believe that pressure from both Indonesian and international NGOs like Amnesty International has certainly helped draw attention to these concerns. However, this pressure must not fade away because executions could happen anytime now. We know that both the Indian government as well as the Pakistani government were very vocal in the lead up to the executions, and we believe it's essential that the Nigerian government and their embassy in the country do the same. We welcome reports that the authorities are planning to undertake a study of these cases. In a report that Amnesty undertook in 2015, we found serious fair trial concerns in a whole range of cases related to the death penalty, and therefore we are calling for a moratorium on all executions to conduct an impartial and independent review of all cases with a view to commutation of death sentences in Indonesia.
Well, Joseph, can you share with us some of those challenges that you face? And when I say you, I mean Amnesty International, when it comes to clamping down on capital punishments, especially when it comes to sovereignty of countries that still practice it.
Yeah, I think one of the most challenging aspects when campaigning against the death penalty is to see how much misinformation there is out there about this punishment, and how governments exploit this fact to appear to be tough on crime and win favors from the electorate. Let me state clearly again that the death penalty is not the solution to crime, and numerous studies have been conducted to show that it does not have a unique deterrent effect. While we understand that the death penalty is a highly emotional issue and is often invoked by the public following terrible crimes, our position is that while these individuals should be brought before courts of justice, that the punishment of death penalty should not be invoked in any cases. What is also frustrating is that often governments point to international law to say that they have fulfilled this in imposing the death penalty. International law is very clear that death penalty must be restricted for only the serious crimes, which excludes drug-related offences. Therefore, we are calling on the Indonesian government and other governments to stop the rhetoric and deal with the issue through other means such as law enforcement and so forth, and not resort to the death penalty as a simplistic solution to crime.
Well, Joseph, we hope that call will indeed be heard. We want to say thank you for joining us on Network Africa.
Thank you.
Well, we've heard what those who are opposed to capital punishment have to say about it, but let's just fill you in on what those who support it also have to say. Now, they believe that it is the ultimate warning, and by that I mean that if would-be criminals know for certain that they will be put to death should they murder with premeditation, for instance, very many of them are much less inclined to commit murder. Another point of those who supports the death penalty, they say that it also provides closure for victims. For instance, if a murderer, for instance, is put to death, that could provide closure for those who have suffered as a result of the crime, like the families of someone who was slain. Those who also support the death penalty say that it is all that would-be criminals fear, citing that they do not necessarily fear being put behind bars as punishment. And they also back the move by saying that it's not always cruel, but that they mean that they could actually be put to death with the injection and not necessarily firing squad like what we saw happen last week. And the final point is that they also believe it's the best way to answer to a murder. That's a life for a life. That's the stance of those who support it. Well, still to come on Network Africa, South Africans prepare to head to the polls on August the 3rd for the local government elections. We find out how preparations are going from Johannesburg.